We know that the number of people who have experienced some form of trauma or abuse in their lifetime is staggering. That's why we'd like to invite you to join us for Effective Trauma Care, a 2-day training led by Dan Allender and Linda Royster from the Allender Center, this October 27th and 28th in Brentwood, Tennessee. This training is designed to equip therapists, practitioners, ministry leaders, and community advocates to gain a deeper understanding of the impact of trauma and abuse on individuals, and to learn effective tools and techniques to engage and support individuals with past trauma. Whether you're already experienced in this field or just starting out, this training will provide valuable insights to enhance your approach and make a lasting impact. Registration is now open at theallendercenter.org/events. Sliding scale tickets and continuing education units are available. This is the final time that the Effective Trauma Care training will be offered in person, so don't miss your chance to participate in this unique learning experience with Dan Allender and Linda Royster this October. Visit theallendercenter.org/events to learn more about Effective Trauma Care and reserve your spot today.
Thank you for listening to the Allender Center podcast. I'm Dr. Dan Allender.
And I'm Rachel Clinton Chen. We're fiercely committed to providing hope and healing to a fragmented world.
And restoration for the heart.
Thank you for joining us. Let's get this conversation started.
Well, let's establish one thing from our last conversation. You are a really bad liar.
Yeah, when I'm like wittingly trying, it doesn't always go well for me.
Let's just go. I'm not going to ask you to do this, but just to go, literally, my great-grandparents broke out of
can't you just see like
they were in?
Like fragile old people climbing out a window, throwing the bag out, running along the railroad tracks.
Yeah, I actually, to be very honest, I can actually see my children somewhat afraid of that with regard to me. But what I've told them is, when we start looking for that kind of living, I want a place that has 24/7 availability of at least 3 different kinds of soft serve ice cream.
24/7?
24/7. So that will keep me in the institution long enough. Otherwise, if I don't have soft serve, I would be breaking out like the way your great-grandparents did.
Well, side note, my grandmother, who you've met, has transitioned into assisted living. And within 1 week of being there, she is now the president of the community board so.
Okay. That's a whole, I think, you know what? We don't normally do this on a podcast, and let's talk about future podcasts. But I do think it would be important to have a time we talk about grandparents, because your grandmother is a glorious human being who's been very central. And I would say the same for mine. But for the moment, what we're addressing is the issue of we don't tell the truth. What we dealt with last time was the reality that we lie. We consciously, bold-faced lie, and sometimes lie in a way that feels deceptive, but we either literally justify it, or at least some inclination is it's better not to tell the whole truth. So what we're addressing today is that we don't tell people the truth. And I think that has just as much importance as the other category. If we can at least begin to name, no surprise that we deceive and we're self-deceived. Once we've at least made that step, then we can move into this, in one sense, even more complicated realm. And that is, what truths do we tell, and what truths do we keep from telling, maybe developmentally, or maybe never at all. And that leaves us, I think, particularly in marriages, in really complicated waters.
I'm laughing because, I might be a bad liar. Sometimes I'm good. I don't want to like give off too much of like, oh, Rachel, she's so innocent. She's such a bad liar. Sometimes I can be a good liar. I like to protect.
Well, you
Yeah,
admitted last time that
I've grown
over
better.
the years, it's not something I think you want to claim as maturity, but that you've actually gotten better at
Well,
lying.
I've just gotten less afraid is really what's happened. I've gotten more loved, so I've gotten less afraid of not getting loved. That's really what's happened. But no, but this realm of we don't tell the truth feels much more something I'm like, oh, I'm swimming in this all the time. And is it because I don't like telling the truth? No, it's because I'm still a recovering codependent, and I still am very afraid of how my desires and needs will impact people's ability to stay in relationship with me. I still have deep, 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 deep fears that, like all the time, Michael will be like, well, what do you think? What should we plan for dinner this week? What are you feeling like? Oh, no, I don't, I'm very open. Whatever, whatever everybody wants. And so then he might name something and then I'm like, no, I don't want that. And so it's like it's this negotiating with our desires known and sometimes below the surface, but that make themselves known when we don't tell the truth. Whether we choose to reveal that or not. But I think this is that realm of like when we're in the realm of desire and competing desires, and how do we negotiate that,
Yes.
and because that's really what it is for me. Like, I don't want my desires to impact somebody else and their desires, and I'd rather defer mine, so that other people can be happy. But what that leads to is a growing resentment, and a feeling of abandonment, that like I'm not being considered, that then I get to, that this is like Michael and I laugh all the time. This is so much our work. And again, I have my own work with him. I'm just talking about myself right now, that I won't disclose my needs, but I desperately want them to be attuned to and met. And so then I will grow in resentment and be mad at him about something that like I have yet to actually tell the truth about and communicate.
And that bind is always at play. You can't escape. It's not like you choose one or the other. Or when you do choose one or the other, you've given up your humanity. You've either given up connection with others, or you've given up the fact that you are different and meant to be different than everyone else within that world. So we're talking about a fundamental tension of living in a fallen world as fallen people, and yet as glorious people in a glorious, beautiful world. Those tensions are always at play. How do you live with that in your marriage, given your codependency and history of anxiety?
Yeah, it's such a good question. And in some ways, when we're talking about we don't tell the truth, we're also talking about attachment styles, right? And how we navigate that bind. You're talking about the intimacy and individuation. And so in my marriage, I am more on the I will choose intimacy over like self. And my husband, even though he actually I think would choose intimacy, he would probably more go the other way. Like he'll choose separation to hold on to some sense of self. And we both have places where that switches because of our stories and our dynamics. And so how I navigate that, it's hard. And it's been in some ways, being like in a sleep deprived, like postpartum season has made me a lot more honest. And I would love to say I do that with a lot of grace, but it's mostly coming out in like places of desperation where I'm like, I don't even care if I need too much right now. I have to sleep a few more hours. It's like just am much more readily asking for my needs. But it's almost like because I don't have a choice. Like if I don't ask for it, it's like sink or swim,
Well, and important to underscore, there are just times where the physicality of our desire rules over our fear of
Yeah.
relational consequences. And that you're just naming something for many women who bear not only the realm of their own work, but also the realm of their own deprivation, sleep, and otherwise. So, yeah, it's such an important category.
Yeah. And I think, but that does raise my anxiety. Like there is that for me to have the courage, like to not be afraid of the consequences and to let other people be who they are and trust that there's kindness and goodness and capacity to love and to move toward. It does raise my anxiety. It's like all the time I'm negotiating even within myself, like, what is my truth? What do I want? What are my desires? What are my needs? So I think in some ways that's part of what makes this complex is it's not like it's not like we always don't tell the truth. Like we know what the truth is and we just don't tell it. A lot of times we're actually needing to take time and tend to like, what is the truth of our desire, our need, what we're longing for, and how much disappointment can we bear? How much hope can we bear? What are the stories that have shaped? So for me, all those stories are there. Like, where have I asked for help or had needs that went really unmet? Where has my need for connection or my desire for connection, led to rejection and abandonment? I mean, that's why, again, this realm is so deeply enstoried and so deeply embodied. Um,
So connected to both. Like my own sense is there's so little that matters to me. That where we eat, what we do, uh, uh, but that's built on the framework of I have one fundamental, shall we say, desire structure, and that is to escape the presence of my mother. That's a strong desire. So when issues would come up, for example, when you work with a Christian in a Christian institution, I have so many people who have said sentences like, "Oh, it just must be so good to work with people who love you and love Jesus and work together. I know there must be conflicts, but it's really good, isn't it?" And the answer is,
yeah.
yeah, it is. It really is. And it's living hell.
This is one of those moments where I wish people could see our faces.
The level of honesty and deceit, the level of envy, the level of judgment, the level of fear, blah, blah, blah. If anything, the dynamics get even more intense because the stakes are higher, but also, therefore, the need for character drives the virtue of deceit even higher. So all that to say, there have been so many times over the last 25 years where terrible things were said or done in the context of the Seattle School or the Allender Center. And I can't tell Becky. And that's my phrase. I can't tell her. It's not for her to have to bear. And it feels generous. But on the other hand, the structure of my life was I can't tell anybody anything about what's going on because it would get me in the web again. And that strong impulse of escape is, I don't care where I go as long as I'm not in the web. So when you begin to assess how your story shapes what you tell and what you don't, what you're aware of desiring, and what you actually do desire even more than, shall we say, some of the other peripheral desires. This is a web, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Well, and then, in my particular situation, and I think this would speak to others as well, when you throw in the story of a previous marriage, previous marital heartache, previous marital dynamics. So even, at times, and, I'm very fortunate to be married to someone who's fiercely committed to doing his work and pursuing healing and staying in it. But there are times where maybe I want to bring a frustration, or I want to bring a desire. And not only am I holding, oh, he's got childhood stories and, different stories that have shaped how he would hear this. I'm also holding, and he's had a previous experience with someone, and how this, something in this realm, how it will echo and reverberate. And so maybe it would just be better if I just eat that, which again is my instinct, because that would be kinder for me to just eat this thing I actually need to bring out into the open, because I don't want to hurt him, or I don't want to trigger him, or I don't want to activate him. So I'll just eat it. But the truth is, we know you can't eat it. It doesn't sound like it metabolizes and then leaves your body. It just stores up somewhere and then comes out sideways. And so, this is, again, especially in your more intimate relationships, whether that's a marriage, whether that's in the midst of a family, whether that's with a dear friend. This is that kind of debris filled that you're walking through of your own heart, of somebody else's. And yet it is where some of the most holy work of building trust, of growing in intimacy, can take place. But man alive, does it take a tremendous amount of courage. And as we talked about in the last podcast, a tremendous amount of grace, because it's not like
No.
it's easy.
No. Well, and it comes again to a central theme. Can we hold the tension of the complexity of our own, let alone the other? And together then hold that complexity and that impulse of so much of what I was referring to as the chaos of the quote unquote Christian organization. And then choosing not to share that with Becky. First of all, my wife's a very wise and insightful woman. And it wasn't like I could hide it completely. So she would see it in my body and my face. What happened today? Oh, I would give her a sentence or two of like, something happened with blah, blah, blah. No names, but we're dealing with the tensions of X, Y. And again, I'm grateful that I don't have a wife who's committed to interrogation, but she also knows my story. She knows thematically that generally I don't want to tell much of anything to anyone about anything. And yet I do. So she could hold that tension to be able to say, I respect your desire to not burden me, but also to not expose information about people you work with that I do love and care for. And yet I also know you. And I know that you don't actually like telling what goes through you. So holding that tension with me and for me, understanding I want to be known, understanding I don't want to be known. And that becomes something that as a friendship or a marriage, that if you don't know the tension exists and that the tension creates a tension for you, given your own reality, let alone the mutual reality, then we're just slipping by one another like ships in the night. And yeah, in some sense, when we can share that tension together, then we can begin working toward how we begin to articulate our desire or the realities that we're engaging, with the full knowledge that I'll never tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth to anyone ever, because one, I don't know it, and two, I'm not sure it's honoring to you or me or us for that to occur.
we've talked about this in preparation, and I think it's still something my idealistic self is wrestling with. And I would imagine there are other people going, what do you mean we don't tell the truth? Like, what do you mean we can't handle the truth? Like, what do you mean? So we're just supposed to lie to each other? There's something in me that is still like trying to find a way through that's different, while also knowing in my bones what you're saying is true. So that's where it's hitting me.
Well, and let me put it in the way that I operate as a therapist. And that is when I'm working with a person or a couple, particularly a couple, I'm seeing things in the first 5 minutes, first half hour for sure, that need to be addressed, but can't be addressed in that first session. But if I don't tell some truth to see what they do with the truth, then if all I've done is ask a bunch of questions and let them depart, I don't think I've done good work. Often what I will bring is the tensions between the two of you are operating with a level at times of cruelty. You make one another pay. Your remark to your wife this moment, do not hear something of the desire to make her suffer. Now, there'd be a lot of therapists who would say, oh my gosh, you don't ever do anything like that because that implies that people have cruelty. Well, I think people do. So naming a little bit of the truth gives me clarity as to how much truth do you want. And so if I've given a little bit of the truth and you can own it, like, but also more than that, have a curiosity. Like, yeah, that's going on, but it's not what I want. Yeah, that's true. You can be cruel, but it's not who you are. It's not what you want on behalf of the other. Now we're entering something of that tension ground that gives us something of the reality of our own humanity and the humanity capacity to engage with the other. So I think there's always a kind of hors d'oeuvre truth. I'm not going to serve you the whole cow in one serving, but a little bit of an hors d'oeuvre. How hungry are you is another way of putting it. And how much do you really want to engage? And I want people to be developmental with me, kindly seeing how much truth in this moment I can bear. And even if I'm known in certain circles as capable of handling a lot, I would still hope there would be a generosity of, in each and every context, where is he? What does it mean? Not that people should be living with fear and judgment, but with that sense of a tenderness and holiness that we hold with one another as to what can you bear today and how far do you want to go in this labor of love. Doesn't that sound better?
Yeah, it sounds very kind. And I'm laughing because where it's taking me is like, I found myself thinking, like, I think I can bear a lot of truth. Like, I've worked really hard to have a strong ego. And then immediately I feel like the spirit is recalling every moment with my children. Because, children tell you the truth with brutality. Like they will just straight up tell you their truth, which is good. Like, if I should say this. If they actually feel there's a healthy enough attachment, they will tell you the truth, no holds barred. I'm just thinking of all these moments where I'm not handling the truth well, and having to go back and say, you don't have to take care of me emotionally. Like, that's not your job. I felt very sensitive about that thing that you said, especially in this season where you're watching me mother a tiny human and you have opinions about it and you're concerned and you want to ask me if I had dairy. And, it's like, yeah, I just have, so I was laughing because I was thinking of myself kind of like, oh, I'm so good, but I'm so good at that. And then realizing, no, actually, I'm just like everybody else. Like I so long to know the truth And I too need it developmentally. And I love the way you're putting that. And I'm wondering if you could put a few more words to what you mean by developmentally so that people have imagination for that.
Well, again, it's perhaps a legitimate parallel, but breaks down quickly. And that is the notion of physicality and how training works. If I want to be, shall we say, in better shape, to do something like a half marathon, or I want to be able to do this long 8-mile hike, then I've got to work. I got to prepare. I've got to have a regimen committed to getting to that spot. And do we actually have that as a goal? I want to live well in the tension. That's different than saying, I want to tell the truth. I'd rather have a person say, I want to live in the tension of truth. So learning how to, in one sense, manage your own body's struggle, anxiety, shame, the tensions of fear of not being enjoyed, abandoned, of not being trusted, being able to go, how do I metabolize all that in my body where I'm not writing it off with a dismissive attitude, on the other hand, not becoming self-absorbed. So living in that tension of the tension of the tension. Again, it's almost getting ridiculous. But if you can begin that process of letting yourself be human, bringing and receiving, bringing grace, receiving grace, both and, so that you're able to grace yourself saying, oh, right now, I don't know what's the right decision. I do know it's the right decision, as we spoke of last time, that I needed to call Becky. And I needed to just say, there was wisdom, and I was dismissive. I'm actually worse than what I implied, not as bad as what you feared. Now, inviting her to enter that tension, for us to enter that tension, for me, and then being able to say, those are actually very small matters compared to the larger issues of life. But be faithful with the small. Do the workout today. You don't plan for a half marathon or marathon in a 2-week period of time. And so if there is this, in one sense, intention, I want to learn to live well with the complexity of what the truth calls me to be and to become, on my own behalf, but on behalf of others, then I think we've got a very different regimen that we're going to be, quote unquote, practicing in order to develop, in one sense, the muscle memory and physical capacity to bear that tension and to be able to move in and through it for yourself and for the sake of others.
Yeah. What I hear and what you're naming is a real wisdom, a living out of love, which feels counter to some of the ways I think, we've all experienced people who are committed to telling the truth, or as you've named, like this kind of or maybe even like a misdefining of authenticity, where like the most important thing is just to like put it all out there, like come what may, because you're being authentic or you're telling the truth. Like we all know those truth tellers who literally will just like chop your head off and be like, well, I'm just telling you the truth. And it's like, but you have contempt. You also have self-righteousness. You also have cruelty. And like you're trying to leverage shame as a way to like let your truth have impact or bring change. Now, I definitely have places and moments where I've utilized all of those things in a moment of just rage or anger or frustration or fear. Well, mostly for me, fear, like moments of fear. And so what I hear you saying is that's not living into the tension of truth telling. That's actually resolving the tension, but not in a way that brings honor, not in a way that grows intimacy, not in a way that builds trust. And that's hard work in seasons where contempt feels more true, when frustration and resentment feels more true. It is a thawing out of like figuring out how to do that in the small. getting back to the face of the other, your own face, the stories that shape you. So I appreciate you kind of parsing that out a little bit more. It helps me have a better imagination for what it is you mean. And you know what, Dan, I do think you are someone that bears that kind of truthfulness and authenticity in ways that is often very unkind, to where you are and what your capacity is and what you want to be holding and tending to in a particular moment. So I just wanted to pause and name, I feel some of the pain of that.
No, thank you. Yeah, I think, and I hope I'm not moving quickly away from your kindness. Anyone who's in a leadership position, and I've tried to say this 1,000,000,000 times, that's every freaking human being. Nobody escapes leadership. Yet there's some who, particularly organizationally, bears the bind that they're needed, but therefore resented. And in the resentment, often there's envy or judgment, an effort to, in many ways, topple the leader, but also we need the leader. And I felt that tension, and I certainly have had the privilege of working with a wide array of leaders from parachurch, church, business. And I don't think anyone in that leadership context feels like they can tell the truth. And yet they have to tell the truth. And yet bearing the truth, telling the truth always creates, in many ways, a kind of energy which doesn't feel commensurate to the benefit of having told the truth. So why tell the truth when it only creates more chaos and conflict? It doesn't so-called help. And I feel that often as a therapist, like if I tell you what I see going on, there's hurt, there's misunderstanding, there's often for people that sense of shame. But yet, can we hold that together to begin to unearth what your heart really desires, what we desire between us? And this is why I keep coming back to Jesus being able to say, I am the way and the truth and the life. And if I'm intending to follow, to be aligned and alive and molded, then I want that way. I want that truth. I want that life. And I'm going to find it not in myself, not in you, but in him. And therefore in me and you and us. And it just holds the tension that what we dream, we will never get.
Yeah.
But what we dream, we will become. And in that becoming, which always implies you're ongoing, that there is some development of closer to
Amen.
who we are and what we want, then it's worth it. Somehow this whole wild, odd, but glorious process is worth it.
The Allender Center podcast is produced by the Seattle School of Theology and Psychology.
If you'd like more information about the Allender Center, you can look at theallendercenter.org.